Absolutely. Thank you so much. Definitely our favorite. And I want to also just introduce everybody that's here. First, I'll start with Damon Banks on bass. Also a New Yorker and co-producer and partner. And I want to introduce you to, if you don't already know, your great Chicago drummer, Isaiah Spencer, who's joining us today for the first time. I want to thank Olula, I want to thank the AfriClassics series and Julie and Otis and Ben Billington and everybody for having us here from New York. And I first met Olula playing here, I guess, a couple of years ago with another string ensemble, of course. You know I love strings, right? So that's where I first met Olula, and then later on doing some professional development with your wonderful Ravinia organization here in Chicago. And so now we meet again. We played on Tamika Reed's Chicago String Jazz Summit just a couple of months ago, so I'm so happy to bring Olula up, not only to start off, I guess, playing with us or whatever she chooses, or to be in conversation. And I just want to let you guys know that in our conversation, you're welcome to ask questions, give thoughts, feedback, and Olua is going to lead us in that conversation. But I think we're going to play first, and we're going to play music composed by Damon Banks. Damon, you want to talk a little bit about it or introduce your piece?
Which one is? Oh, I don't know. Kind of hard to do something too short. Is my TV? Yeah. So this is a song called "Children of Angel." I released a record in 2013 called "Powerhouse," and it basically kind of all the songs kind of represented places like some of the places I traveled in my music career, and growing up in New York, just like in Chicago, you're exposed to so many different genres and so much diversity and so much pluralism, multicultural environments that you travel through even in our own city. So Children of Angel was kind of something that sounded kind of playful, but also I never hear a lot of songs dedicated to Gambia or that part of West Africa in the sense. So yeah, we're gonna play it, and I want my esteemed colleagues here, and I hope you enjoy it. We're so happy to be back in Chicago. I mean, I can just go on and on about this is like my second home. My brother raised his kids here, and we went to the Cubs game yesterday, and I think we had luck. Yeah, so it's nothing like Wrigley though. Nothing like Wrigley, so still buzzing from that experience. Maybe I'll stay away from Wrigley for a while. I brought them very much. Okay, here we go.
specializes as a social activist as well as an artist, a teaching artist, and an all-around dynamic person. So that's my impromptu Gwen bio.
Thank you.
Very nice. I wanted to start us out reading a quote or two from an essay by Zora Neale Hurston. This essay is called Spirituals and Neo-Spirituals and is from You Don't Know Us Negroes and other essays. She writes, Negro songs to be heard truly must be sung by a group and a group bent on expression of feelings and not sound effects. She goes on to say, the artist is consciously creating, carefully choosing every syllable and every breath. The dialect breaks through only when the speaker has reached the emotional pitch where he loses self-consciousness. In the mouth of the Negro, the English language loses its stiffness, yet conveys its meaning accurately. Negro singing and formal speech are breathy. The audible breathing is part of the performance, and various devices are resorted to adorn the breathtaking. This is, of course, the very antithesis of white vocal art. European singing is considered good when each syllable floats out on a column of air, seeming to not have any mechanics at all. The breathing must be hidden. Negro song ornaments both the song and the mechanics. It is said of a popular preacher he has a third straining voice. So, I wanted to read that because I feel in reading that I felt so much of my own classical education, the strictures to achieve a technical precision and to hide the mechanics of playing. Before the show we were talking about the necessity of releasing Eurocentric standards when it comes to making our music, to educating around music. We discussed the kind of stank that Western classical education can leave on you, even as you try to move out into the world and release that. So I wonder, this audience having heard the ways that you are releasing, could you describe for us what that release looks like for you and what that means?
Well, not only do we release standards other than European standards, but we want to celebrate that. So it's also about releasing and celebrating the difference. Like we celebrate the difference in our cultures and in our people. Because if you don't celebrate what art is coming from different cultures, then what are you saying about that culture? So it's a very distinct and clear and very close connection. And I'm hoping that when you read a little bit in the book and you mentioned about breath and listening, I'm hoping that you heard with this ensemble that we were breathing and that we were listening and that our standards were of our own and not necessarily technically very prepared. And I think that kind of improvisation is something that we are all involved in day to day. You don't have to be a violinist or a cellist or even a musician. I think that improvisation is something that we all experience from day to day. And I think that it's one of the highest forms of freedom. Because when we improvise, we are free to do make other choices, make other decisions, and respond to those choices and decisions that we make. And we want to bring that way of thinking and that way of being to any kind of collaboration that we join in together. So that, to me, is a part of making art, and that's what I thrive on when I think about who I like to experience my art with. And it's what I thrive on when I think about who are my tribe and people that I like to be around, and people that I like to communicate with, the people that I like to hang out with, and do all sorts of things that have nothing at all to do with music. So when people think like this, they are open-minded and they are independent. Yeah.
Yeah, I love, I used to be terrified by improvisation until I sort of realized, like, oh, I'm improvising all the time. Like right now, I'm improvising. I don't know exactly what the next word is going to come out of my mouth, and it's starting to show. But as we go into this and going back to the portion of the group bent on expression of feeling and not on sound effect, one thing I noticed when I began improvising still in a Western classical setting, and I know that you have a different path to improvisation, but for me, I came to it first through conservatory, and I noticed that a lot of people were interested in achieving a sound effect, but not necessarily attaching that sound to a deeper expression. That it was almost about showing off what you can do rather than what you can do supporting what you need to say. I wonder if you could speak about your path to improvisation and how you do or do not see that in the musical world or generally around.
Well, my path to improvisation, I realized early on that my classical training was going to lead me to the path of being technically equipped to express myself coming from my inner conversation. So that was always my desire, and it still is. And I think that we musicians, we just work on that for this lifetime and the next one and the next one, is to be able to express very fluidly what we're thinking about. And so what you mentioned about earlier about breath and making sound or technically being equipped, or maybe being overly concerned about the technical aspect. I think we can think about people who have a wonderful handle on a language and that are always talking, but what are they saying? So it's kind of the same analogy, is that you have all of this vocabulary, you have all of this technique, you have all of this facility, and you may know all of the harmonic structures, and when you look at the music, you may know exactly what scale to play, and then what next venture you go on harmonically, but are you really trying to have this kind of fluid conversation within yourself, within your body, and through your body, and out to your instrument, whether your instrument is voice or whatever instrument you might play. So that is what, for me, I long to do, and this is what I work to do, is to speak sort of when spoken to, and when I mean when spoken to, I mean, spoken to through my inspiration. And a lot of times, depending on how I'm collaborating and who with, maybe it's time just not to play anything, and to just listen and to see what people say, and to have that kind of reflect and inspire what I should say. So I think or at least I feel like with the traditional classical playing, there's a real enormous focus on the technique. And I think that you learn to execute, and you may not learn what you're doing, and you may not learn from the inside what all that means. It's interesting because we've been on professional development together, and a lot of string players and other musicians that have trained through conservatory that are amazing technical players. They can play any and everything. But it's just interesting to me that when you take away the music and a piece of paper, that there's nothing there. So I think that that's a failed attempt as music educators, that we should be teaching young musicians from the very beginning that music comes from your imagination.
And we can couple that with the technique of learning an instrument, learning to sing, but we should not ever leave out the imaginative part of what's going on with music, because I'm thinking, or I'm hoping that when you listen to a play, that your imagination is visualizing different ideas and different scenarios, and everybody in this room could probably say they felt something different when they heard us play any number of any measures or any segments of music that we've been playing. So I think that's important to know. Yeah.
And I want to open it up because we're all educators. As we try to like manifest this for our students and for younger generations, how do you go about sort of demystifying the process? I do, and I'll go back to this person for a moment. She makes a parable, like going on from where I left out. A white man built a house. So he got it built and he told the man, plaster it good so that nobody can see the beams and uprights. So he did. Then he had it papered with beautiful paper and painted the outside. And a Negro built him a house. So when he got the beams and all in, he carved beautiful grotesques all over the sills and stanchions, and beams and rafters. And so both went to live in their houses and were happy. I read that and I thought about my education and how, like you said, those tools and techniques were taught, but not necessarily the ultimate goal of what, like, achieving technical precision would be. So I wanted to ask this and open it up for us educators, like, how do we go about demystifying that process for our students? Well, I won't say.
Well, for me in the classroom, I like to do some of the things that we just did on stage here, which is that some of those segments of the music were free and open improvising, and some of those segments were us experimenting with different sounds on our instruments. You know, plucking or tapping on the wood or using different sound effects. I think that I'm feeling like with young musicians, we have to be a little more free in the classroom so that young musicians use their imagination and not take everything so serious and not be very punitive about right or wrong or yes or no, and be very open. So I found that to be very effective when even I do professional development with teachers who have graduated from conservatories. They didn't seem to have that kind of training where they could have the time or the space in a classroom to just relax and just not take things too serious and to imagine, kind of research on the instrument, kind of experiment. I think experimentation is key for discovery and for creating a unique sound and for developing your inner voice and your own sound, your own how you connect your imagination. I think we miss a lot of that in our training, in our classical training.
In terms of, Gwen and I have a long teaching program. It's creative education, but there's a couple of things that I think that this is about the education system in general, not just teaching the arts. But we operate on the principle that all kids need to be together. They need to express themselves. And I think that we teach really life skills through things like improvisation, achievable music where you have kids that have developmental issues, learning issues, delays, at risk, and trauma kids. We want to give them a safe space so that they can feel empowered and develop self-esteem. So one of the things, because everyone's in a different place, we try to meet the students where they are. We want to know what kind of music you love, what you respond to. And then depending on where they are in terms of their own technical development, we create music so that everyone can participate. Because Because as students get older, they start to ask questions, they start to notice things about society, life, politics. You know, we let them know that, you know, 90%, 95% of music that you ever heard came from the foundation of Amadeus Bach, Brahms, Beethoven. Before they documented a symphony, they messed around and tried to figure it out. And that process is not what you see. You see a version of what was decided upon. But everything that Bach did in devotional music in the Protestant church was improvisation music. That was documented. So, you know, there's nothing on a higher level musically to us than Bach. But then you talk about if Europe is only 10% of the planet, then we don't want an imbalance where you're dismissing 90% of the music or culture around the world to elevate something that is only one piece of the world, which is still some of the highest level music you can find. So it's about embracing the diversity of our students, finding where they are, helping them achieve goals, which is really life skills, because improvisation is being able to adapt to changing situations, right? So you do that for music. If you have kids that need to learn how to work together, well, that's going to help them in life together. Whether they're in a corporation, whether they're in a startup, or in college, you need to work harmoniously. So that's what an ensemble experience is all about. And also being able to take risks, because if you don't take risks in life, you'll never achieve anything. So if we give them a safe space to experiment, or to give them some tools which they can improvise with, then they can take that into life and say, well, I succeeded by taking risks in this music room. I'll do that when I go to school or when I go to job, when I find a career. You know, these are things that you can find on the soccer field. These are things that you can find in a dance company. Same thing you do in the classroom with music. A lot of times, a lot of music educators don't think about that. So, you know, and another thing we said about demystifying the whole audience experience, most music from every culture is celebratory music and has to do with people gathering and sharing, whether it's a meal, whether it's a milestone, live. You think about your own cultural background, music is always, you know, integrated, is always interactive. So instead of people sitting there and you playing music and you're here and I'm here, it was never like that before. There was a time when we were all together involved in music. So that's why things that speak to us the most is always participatory music, and things where we can also always be a part of something. And then, you know, we tell the kids, hey, this is not a concert, it's a share. Your parents and your friends are coming to support you, to support what you've been doing this week. It's not about, I got to get ready for this concert, and then there's this stage fright, which is some of the things, you know, these are the basic tools that we try to instill. But we also have to just instill it in ourselves. You know, we teach what you have to learn, right? So these are things we're always trying to be mindful of as we proceed as artists and musicians. But it starts in the classroom. You know, all children want to create, and so our job is to make it safe for them to be able to do.
Right, and I feel like if we start from the outside, meaning give them a lot of latitude, a lot of creative space, and then we bring it in, then I think we have achieved this feeling of being fearless. You know, you start from the outside, give them the freedom, then we're coming in, we're finding. And meanwhile, that gives us as teaching artists, as educators, a chance to really get to know each kid individually, because every kid is going to be different and have a different learning process. So all of this is sort of a way that we hope that educators can be trained so that when they have students, they have young musicians, they will come to them with a different platform that will then create different global citizens on the planet.
Across all disciplines, not just the arts.
Right.
Not across all disciplines.
Yeah, make them universal learners, you know. Because I never have students that I teach because I think they're going to be professional musicians. Never. I feel like music chooses you, and the instrument chooses you. I'm just there to kind of guide you, give you information, and I'm just as excited as you are to see where you're going to go. So it's all like a collaboration where I'm watching you, I'm seeing what really elevates you, I'm seeing what really thrills you, and then I'm going to take you in that direction of that way, and that's all I'm supposed to do. To me, I'm not supposed to try to make everybody learn the way I learn, or learn the way that some book is telling you to teach you, or some pre-made curriculum or anything like that. I don't think that that's the way for successful education. and I don't think that it creates holistic human beings.
I always feel sad when kids stop doing music because of having a difficult relationship with teachers who are trying to, they have this pre-made vision of their own way of thinking about what perfection is. And it's like, well, no, it's music. There's no perfection in music. You take a song and make what you want out of it. So, I mean, a lot of us would not be musicians today if it wasn't for, bands and artists that took all sorts of risks. And, it wasn't for the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix that would be. I mean, forget about it. So and there's a lot of songs that if you give it to someone who's from, let's say a classical, European classical, whatever, 19th classical mindset, they may take a song like Jimi Hendrix or Beatles and try to find imperfections in it. It's like, well, no, the perfection is about everything that everything that we're involved with. And being in the moment at the time that they existed, that's really what we respond to, honestly. So,
yeah, we were speaking before the show, and I was saying, I really believe a classical education, whether that's music, literature, philosophy, science, what have you, is really only as good as their ability to bring analysis and criticism to the sources that you are engaging with. So, like when you mentioned Bach and his religious music and the improvisatory nature, I mean, in classical education we're kind of taught like, oh, you got to now figure out how to improvise, what's it called, left hand, like when the piano. Figure bass, yeah. And that's improvisation, right? It's like a graphic score. It's some information that you then use your musical knowledge and draw from that reservoir to interpret that. I want to get us back to playing some music. I do have some more questions. I'll come back to at the end. But I also, speaking of it being participatory, we're here. This is a share. I know I see an educator in the room. I know there's probably more educators, parents, people who've been through education. I wonder if anybody has any questions or comments about that demystification process, and if there's anything that you found freeing once you were able to sort of pull back the veil.
My question is about having something to say. Have you ever encountered a student who's like, what do I have to say? What do you mean I have something to say? How do you connect them to this, no, you do have something to say?
I'm so happy you said that because part of what goes wrong is that, they say a lot of metaphysical materials and spiritual books, transmission, whatever, channeling. It's like, up until the age of 7, children are totally connected to their own soul and their spirits around them and like whatever environment they came from. They're so fearless. They don't care about anything else but, expressing the humanity that they are. Right? And you notice that once they get to middle age and things become more complicated, then they start to become more insular and peer pressure. But we've had the greatest improvisers we've ever had in our lives that were first graders, kindergartners, second graders. Yes. They will take one note, play the shit out of that note. This is my, I own this note. And it's the most exciting, the most honest, the most, I'm sorry. Because there's such passion and such humanity, and they are so much in touch with themselves, and then life starts to change. So I think what it is that if you ask the fourth grader, tell me about your summer, or write about your best friend, they will write, they will express, so I think it is being in touch with your inner child, first of all, and not growing up, but staying, not childish, but childlike, and just kind of being really in touch with the core of who you are, Because, and then the antithesis of that, or to piggyback on that, is when you have jazz musicians or jazz students who, when they first start learning their instrument, when they first start solo, they start learning things from the masters, they don't really have a lot to say. They play a lot of things, but there's really not a lot of depth because, not to judge, they just haven't experienced. They've never been heartbroken, they've never traveled anywhere, they've never had the arc and ups and downs of life. So if you have that and you put that into art, obviously the art is going to have more depth if you have more experience. So there's nothing against them, but there's no mentorship with older musicians like they used to do, because in the blues world, the jazz world, they always were hanging around the master musicians and got to absorb information in the environment of those mentors. A lot of younger musicians don't have mentors. A lot of stuff is online, a lot of stuff is on YouTube, so there's a virtual reality there, but there's not an authentic reality. And then once you experience life and you put something on paper, or you do movement, or you make a film about it, obviously you'll have more to say if you have more experiences to offer. But you can't say that to a 6-year-old because they don't care. They're like, whatever my life is, I'm fearless about it, which is so refreshing when we teach different
Oh, yeah. I mean, the younger, there's a beauty in not knowing, having too much knowledge. And so that's what we realize with these very young musicians. We're talking about these first graders and second graders. They don't know anything. They just know that they can play first, second, and third finger on one string. And so it's very minimal, and they do what they do with that. And then, we have seen young musicians like this, young kids that we have to say, all right, we have to give somebody else a chance. Because they always want to take solos. And to me, that's where we should be.
Your inspiration.
That's where we should be. Nobody should be afraid to make music without music in front of them, without a piece of paper. And I don't know if you teach young kids music, but one of the ways that we sometimes start off is we have everybody do collective improvisation. So nobody is on the spot. Everybody is playing together.
There's no hierarchy. There's no competition.
Right. You may give them a tonality, maybe a pentatonic scale, maybe just 3 or 4 notes. And then the idea with that, because we know that we're setting them up for success, if we're, for instance, just using 2 or 3 or 4 notes, we know that's going to be successful. But now this gives them an opportunity to listen and respond, like we did when we were doing some of the different improvisations. I mean, there's the 4 of us that we never played together. So this was really refreshing to me, because what we have to do, and Olula, we could have clicked way back into our classical headset, and we could have said, we're going to do these songs like we always do. But no, different people bring on different energy, so we had to be open to that, and we had to welcome the changes of these arrangements of this music. So with young students, they don't even have that baggage.
Yeah.
They don't have that knowledge. They're just going free and open. And so that's the beauty of that to me. You start with collective improvisation and talk about listening and responding. They know listen and response. There's nursery rhymes, all that stuff. They know all of that. You as a teacher can play some little 4-beat phrase and then have them repeat it, and then you go back and forth like that, and then you let a student read that. And you will definitely have somebody that will want the clown in the room, or whatever, the troublemaker will stand up and want that attention, and you make them the leader, and then everybody else responds, and then you put everybody together, and then they listen. It's a good way. And then you kind of, what you do is then you narrow it down from there. You say, all right, half the class is not going to play, and then you get down to 1 or 2 people, and you're soloing by yourself. You're going to find out who is not interested in what anybody thinks, and they're just going to play whatever they play.
Any other questions?
Could I just validate what you were saying from out of the gate, what I heard of the percussion being more textual maybe than rhythmic, and the standards of the notation. Clearly you succeeded in what I heard on the violin, cello, and everything. And the crashing you did, it's clearly you transcended it and both of those scaffolds. And that sort of dissonance of like a reverence of what the greats of the past, but also it's almost like oppressive, where it's like if you don't meet someone else's standard of perfection or excellence, you're kind of cast out. And just reject that. So it's very drawn to music that, like you said, it embraces it, but it also, I'm sorry, what did you say? You recognize the genius of it, but you also appreciate it. It's not the only standard that exists. You recognize the diversity of all different kinds, all different people, and celebrate it. Yeah, of course. So it was interesting saying that because I was like, that's exactly what I heard out of the gate when we were all so excited about it. So I just wanted to validate that my ear, what you set up to do, and clearly.
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
No, we just got to pass it on.
I'm amazed to hear that the four of you have not played with each other before. That is the last thing I expected to hear. And the other thing is that as I was listening and watching, I myself was sitting here saying, look at how they are listening to each other. And here you are talking about the intensity of the listening. So between finding out you never played with each other before, which didn't seem that way at all, followed by the power of listening, it's just striking that that is what your message is, and that is what is okay.
That is what that's what's universal, and that's what we all need to do, is listen to each other. So that's that classroom skill that we're taking and sharing in real life, right?
We're trying to not be like Congress. But I digress. So,
No. So, I'll save my other question for after lunch.
Okay. All right.
I'm gonna let you get back to it.
All right.
We're going to do a famous, kind of amongst the jazz community, and even beyond that, we're going to do famous minor blues. And because we're in Chicago, it's even more important. No, it's because, they almost do it
Blues, yeah.
want to be on the
called Black Havana. I'm a person of mixed Black American and Puerto Rican descent, so for me, you know, this song and Black Havana, this represents to me the broadness of the Black diaspora. And I mentioned here that we try to expand the idea of this classical music to include sort of a Black diasporic music. I've been saying, you know, there's indigenous folks in Colombia and Panama who called the continents of North and South America Abya Yala. So I've been interested in the Black Abya Yala, the Black American as in the Americas classical tradition, which includes things like the clave and these rhythms that we heard. So my question is, how does like blending musics and genres open possibilities and corridors for cross-cultural collaboration? And audience, be thinking, because I might ask you to contribute something like listening. That's my teacher warning.
I think, I feel, I know the importance of everyone being introduced to other cultures. You know, with our narrowness with, let me just say, television and our news feeds, and we somehow don't get, we aren't informed about things that go on outside of just the United States, outside of just here. We have to go to alternate sources for information. So I hope that music is a source that we can use to introduce everyone to other countries. I think it's important that we know that the clave, of course, came from West Africa, and then because of the transatlantic slave trade, went to the Caribbean, and then from there, southern parts of the United States, I mean Louisiana, and those places like that have this mix, this melting pot, and I think it's important that we know about that through music, through mixing culture.
Yeah, I wrote Black Havana kind of as an homage to the complexity of, multicultural environments in the Caribbean, particularly parts of South America, of course North America, parts of Europe, and like that. So, there's a lot of things, things change, but some things don't. So what's interesting is that there's a lot of stories within the community that never really nurtured or really shared that widely because, some things, because it shows the commonality more than differences. I think that, antagonism and instinct and fighting is somehow more sexy than, reconciliation or, togetherness of people. In terms of culture, I always noticed that the music and art and theater and stories that come from, environments that have a mixture of cultures are the most interesting and some of the most, fascinating because it draws on all these experiences and interaction with each other. And right now there's a war on immigrants, but, this is a country of immigrants. And, some people want to avoid the idea of immigrants, but immigrants are in our bodies every like. And the shared experiences of everyone that has landed on this landmass is all in our spirits and our souls and everything we eat, it's just a part of us. And I wouldn't want us to. So, to me, I think the more we celebrate what we all have to bring to this party called life, then the easier it is to get through it. But it's also something that's more enjoyable and something that is just more fun because they're more common than you have differences. Place just my own personal thing, I have both things going on in my family. My mother's side is Jamaica and my father's side is from Virginia. So both my grandparents from my mother's side came through El Salvador. They chose to come to Jamaica. So the former grandfather came to America, he was in Cuba, and he was a cook in Cuba. Very good guy. This is from was single, so I mean, that doesn't fit. But I'm a father. What are you going to be? And then he came to America, you know, and both my grandparents were here all the time. You know, so the immigrant experience can be shared widely through the Black community, but it's never talked about. You know, there's a lot of diversity within our cultures that are not celebrated or not, and then there's separation within the community oftentimes. This is unfortunate, you know, but I mean, and then, you know, raising 4 children during the Depression, he did more in his life, opening up new businesses, than people do with all these opportunities. So there's no excuses when you think about all of our grandparents. What they've gone through doesn't matter what your ethnic is, what your religious persuasion is. Those folks had so much vision and so much faith, so much hope, and so much love that they got through everything. So people think this is hard times now. When you look back any period, it's not easier than now. So it's like, what are you complaining about? You know, this is kind of stuff you doesn't get through it. But through music, you can kind of tell these stories and actually find all the commonalities. And that's what we try to instill with students. You know, we try to share with students, share that with our friends and colleagues, you know, and then hopefully make our musical and creative experience richer, you know, by celebrating.
That's the problem. I mean, we talk about the social relationship between, that's part of the problem we're having now. We have smartphones and companies.
Yeah, it's free for swearing now. The child's gone.
Like, you know, embracing the culture and appreciating it, understanding the relationship, which is, you know, like I said, the feedback, everybody wants to say it, they hang out. So, like, really doing the homework and seeing the highlights. And that's cool. That's something I try to encourage the home. I mean, really, you just have to understand that it was written before you came. Somebody wrote it out before you came. They pontificated or elaborated upon it, and now you're doing the same. It's no different than when you come out the womb. You learn, to go in, you know, some point come, mama, dada, then mother, father, old girl, old man, you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, I mean, it permeates into all these different things that have different meanings socially for other people. You know, we might not look at our parents as something as fun as people know the truth because they have a legitimate reason. However, the point is just like making sure that it stays organic at the same time. Within teaching how organic it is, creating a pathline or a pipeline to how organic it feels good and then the whole time out of the see how all of these things come that heterogeneous
All these conversations are going to continue, but I will take a couple of audience comments. Anybody have something about how they think music, or maybe an experience of music creating that? Oh, yeah.
Just think about like genres and like sort of like rock historic music. I think there was a conversation when we met, sort of like the banjo, like I'm a banjo player, like it's sort of like realized instrument almost like coming from like African traditions, arriving in the Caribbean and shifting and changing like as far as conjecture, academic conjecture, but like the exchange that facilitated, like, playing music from all these different West and Central African cultures in this new context. And then how that goes on to go to North America and like gets transformed further by engagement with Celtic American, Irish, and South Irish cultures, and then indigenous musicians as well. And like how even in like traditions that seem to be just like Irish or just indigenous, like fiddle, for example, you can still hear that indigenous sound, that black sound in sort of those traditions that they still hear in America. And like how the thing was sort of new way of like connecting all these things. Like in my own practice, like discovering through like say like Irish American connections, like Farewell to Nova Scotia, which is about my own concept of like Africa, for example, or like a song about Irish shipping vessels and slave trade. That's like, oh, this is how spell systems in this connection. So being able to be stronger with these stories and connections that shape each other in conflict, and like using that to create like a different stories and experience that those are the experiences. So personal also experience. It's super cool and speaks to like this whole like Pan-American, Pan-African diaspora genre of music.
Well, I was thinking, I was wondering if any of your travels you were staying in a place that was very different from how you grew up and sort of absorbed the music. I think I was a peaceful volunteer in Thailand for a couple of years and I think I had some family houses there. And when I went back to the States after my service, for several years I was in grad school studying theology, very Western hymn tune environment. I grew up with Western music. And so one of the reeds in my family mountain wrote, which fortunately had a duplicate on the other side of the instrument, but it made playing the traditional and the melodies time music more difficult. So I was playing for several years, playing more hymn tunes. As soon as I went back to Thailand, though, to spend the summer, it was as if something shifted inside my head. I was playing a lot more time music when I was just hanging out and playing the instrument. I mean, not necessarily to perform. I was in Thailand for the summer. I was hanging out and playing music, and it was as if the notes in my head shifted. I had wondered for a while if some players of kind of Thai Western fusion didn't hear the same chorus one time. I was trying to image. Somebody was playing by ear on a keyboard, a song I moved in the radio that had a borrowed chord in it, and they were just playing 1, 4, 5 chords. And I reached over my head and said, "Oh, I don't play left hand." I was thinking, "Oh, for me, it's not about which hand you play with; it's about the chords." And so I was thinking, some of the musicians in different cultures around the world notice things more and hear other things less. And so it reminds me of something I heard in an interview when I was in high school with David Burns talking heavy, saying, well, a lot of music around the world you hear more rhythm. This is after Renee and I come out. So Once in a Lifetime in 1981 sounds very different from a lot of other things on the radio. A lot of other things had defined chords. Anyway, so going back to you, have you sensed in yourself, as you're spending a lot of time with people in a different culture, that the way you play ends up shifting because you're more responsive to something that they're responsive to?
Yes. I mean, that's, I think, what creative music is all about. It's being open to changing the way you approach things and listening and responding. So absolutely, and I welcome that, and that's what I want, because I want to broaden my palette of what I do on my instrument. And that's why I think it's really cool that a lot of artists like to travel a lot. I know I do just for that reason, getting to experience and know different cultures and see how that's going to affect my playing and how it's going to shift my perspective of how I think about playing and just being around different people. Yeah, that's what I live for, part of what I live for.
Maybe touched on this before, but I came up with it. But
with all of your study and practice and playing with so many different types of musicians. I'm not a musician myself, I'm a dancer, but I perform for them and I'm very, I would say, I feel spoiled because there's certain times where you connect me to my spirit, my identity, and it's like that. It's like a switch that kind of turns on like music is so powerful and lasting that way. And for me, I don't have to travel. I can just be, kind of all of this lost in a sense. And then I eventually come back, but it's like there's this feeling that we're just like probably a feeling some meditation, but just, we're coming around with others and doing and so I'm wondering how you navigate it, because I'm sure you already know, what it is when you stay in touch and not what it is. Not necessarily what it is it's just you're finding this energy, this vibration. This is for anyone.
Well, they really big in themselves. So, before there was a clubhouse, there was a place called the Paradise Garage in New York City. And it existed around the same time as Studio 54. So this is before Frankie Knuckles got to Chicago. This is when Frankie Knuckles was from the Bronx, he deep in New York. And, the reason why house music happened is because of Paradise Garage. So this club opened at midnight and closed at midnight. Needless to say, there was no dress code. It was totally non-binary. All SWAT of humanity was there. All of the LGBTQ community, everybody was there. And, the music was nonstop. And the punch that you could drink or you could not drink, we never knew what drink from. But some people drank it, some people didn't. But, but to say, when you talk about religion, we talk about being transformed. The playlist and what was spun in that club every night was unimaginable. It was the most transformative experience, and that became global. It became house music and all these different genres. So these were all different records that were used, but they were all played in the spirit of not about blending beats, but it was all about playing the most amazing music that was celebratory and brought them together. So we've done that on stage with collaborating with movement. I have people in my family that teach Alvin Ailey, work at dancers, Tracy Jones. We've done that with movement. We've done that with visual artists. That's why it's interesting, because when you do a theater piece and you're doing something that's multimedia, it's so overwhelming because you have all these different disciplines that are assaulting you at once. So it's not just music, it's visual, it is dance, it's movement, it's a poet, it's spoken word. So those are some of those enjoyable experiences for us, because we've been very lucky to be involved with collaborations that involve more than one discipline. I think the more open you are, the more open you get. The more you open the door, the more doors you see. So I think I'm just happy that I've been privy to a lot of different amazing artists in my life who I've admired, looked up to, and they kind of create a pathway for me to see more. And so, you've been very fortunate, because as a dancer, you are around probably indigenous drumming, languages through sound and the texture of drumming, whether it's from Guinea, whether it's from Brazil, whether it's from Senegal. In these situations, you are actually interacting with the culture on a level that a lot of musicians don't even know. So, and then you're using your body and you're using language, which is another way of communicating, but it's also transferring history through your own movement is transforming us. If we're observing you or if we're joining you. So I think that's the fun part of the discussion, is that we get to talk about the things that have impacted our lives, and that's another lane that's a part of a bigger lane. Because I was saying earlier before you got here that most of the music around the world is participatory. Music has always been about ceremony, it's always been about community, where there's not an audience sitting there and a band here. It's like we're all dancing and playing and singing together, because music had a role in different societies. It was all about marking different events. So once we got away from that, then that's when all the subgenres and labels and categories started to come into play, which is further separating us, about, what we should be thinking about, which is just being together and enjoying each other.
On that note, let's see the
Yeah.
We talked a lot about educators, so this piece is written by one of my mentors and teachers that I studied jazz on violin with. That's John Blake Jr., who is from Philadelphia, and his son is a good friend of Isaiah's, who's an amazing drummer, Jonathan Blake. You may have heard of, but this is called Twinkling of an Eye. a CD player, that is.
Yes. Thank you all so much for coming. We hope to see you back on October 5th for a special event. We're going to have a 9-piece ensemble led by Mike Montford from Detroit. So it's going to be a very special conclusion to Afro Futures weekend. But thank you so much for coming. Give it up one more time for Gwen Laster.